It's fantastic to see so many people here tonight. Just really is, it's amazing to see. And we spoke last week about the success of the series over the last two years, 2.5 years. But it's fantastic to see another bumper crowd here tonight. I hope I won't let you down. I hope what I have to tell you will be of interest. But before I start, can I get a plug in, please, for the 23rd Annual Historic Houses Conference of Ireland, which will take place on the 19th to the 20th of May this year here in Maynooth. The theme of this year's conference is Everyday Life in the Country House. And we have over 25 speakers joining us over those 2 days from France, Holland, America, Scotland, England, and Wales. And it promises, and not to forget Ireland, of course, and it promises to be 2 great days, as the conferences have been in the past. Now, details of the conference and the proceedings will be unveiled in the next couple of weeks. But if you're not on the mailing list, and not Elaine's mailing list, but if you're not on the centre's mailing list, you might see me after. We can put your name down and get that to you. And I mentioned that as well because what I want to talk to you about tonight is very much an aspect of everyday life in the country house. Okay, and perhaps this paper could have been delivered at the conference in May, and maybe some part of it will be mentioned during the proceedings there. But what I want to talk to you tonight is about life at Carton House during the early 19th century through the eyes of a tutor. That tutor being Henry Joly. Henry Joly served as tutor to the children of the Dukes of Leinster for about 18 months throughout the years 1801 to 1802. It's a very significant period in Carton's history and indeed in Maynooth's history as well. It comes after the 1798 rebellion, of course, when the family have been caught up in what Lord Edward Fitzgerald has done. It also occurs in the months before the Emmet Rebellion of 1803. So we picture and can place ourselves in the Maynooth of that period. And it also comes in the years before the remodelling of Carton, the Carton that we see there today pictured on screen. Remodelled, of course, by Richard Morrison, after 1815, between 1815 and 1817, with monies acquired from the sale of Leinster House. And I'll touch on Leinster House in a few moments as well. But our story begins tonight on the 5th of October, 1769. And this man here, William Robert Fitzgerald, later 2nd Duke of Leinster, but at the time Lord Kildare, the eldest son of the Duke of Leinster, he arrived back in Ireland on the morning of the 5th of October 1769, having undertaken a number of years on the continent as part of his grand tour. And we know from the writings of Lord Kildare at that time, mainly through letters home to his mother looking for more money, things never change. We know that the then Lord Kildare, later 2nd Duke of Leinster, came into contact with a man called Jean Jasper Joly. Jean Jasper Joly was born in 1740 in Liège, near Liège, the town of Charnoux, near Liège in modern-day Belgium. Okay, a later historian of the Joly family would write that they were not rich in terms of money, but so great was their store of knowledge and learning and their appreciation of the simple things in life that they obtained wealth far beyond anything that could be measured in pounds, shilling and pence. Of course, the Joly family were, in the 19th century, amongst the largest collectors of books in Ireland. And later, Jasper Robert Joly would donate 23,000 volumes to the National Library, some of which are only being catalogued at the present by members of the library. Also pictured there, you have the eminent geologist, scientist, John Joly, a great-grandson of Jean Jasper Joly, who we begin our story with tonight in 1740. Of John Plunkett Joly, a son of the tutor for the Dukes of Leinster at Carton. It was said that he was the greatest collector who ever lived in Ireland of books, drawings, prints and manuscripts. And we'll touch on some of those prints and manuscripts which formed a part of life at Carton in the early 1800s. Our story begins with this man here, Jean Jasper Joly, as I said, born in 1740 in Charnoux in Belgium. In around the year 1756, then age 16, he went into service with an English merchant called John Osborne. And his passport from that time tells us that he journeys from time to time in the towns and country districts lying around us, sometimes with a companion known to him, by the mercy of God, free from all contagious diseases, and making profession of the Catholic Apostolic faith. Okay, so that was Jolie. And in around 1768, he came into contact with the Duke of Leinster, with Lord Kildare. Lord Kildare was visiting, amongst other cities, Dresden, Milan, and Paris, and was said to have been very short on finance. Jean Jasper Jolie loaned him £1,000, and in recompense for that loan, he was made his private secretary. And so Jolie arrives in Ireland in 1769 with the later Duke of Leinster. He was later promoted to being a Freemason of Dublin in 1774. In the same year, he converted to Protestantism, and with the then second Duke of Leinster's help, he was made Keeper of the Irish House of Lords in 1775 with an annual salary of £100. He was described at this time as being sober, faithful, diligent, a Protestant, and one very capable of performing the duty and service of a doorkeeper. Okay, now his duties involved much more than just holding the door open in the House of Lords. But in 1772, he came to prominence within the House of Lords when it went on fire. And it's said that he went back in amidst the burning flames to rescue two great tapestries, those which had been done by Jean van Wever in 1732, the victory at the Boyne and the siege of Londonderry. And Jolie, for his bravery, was later rewarded with oils, paintings done in oils by James Mahony, reflecting these two tapestries which he had safely taken from the House of Lords on College Green. These two paintings, by the way, hang in a home in County Kildare to this day, and important artefacts of that period. Jolie, as I said, was a confidant of the Duke of Leinster, and indeed was everywhere to be seen with him. This is Francis Wheatley's painting of the volunteers on College Green in 1779. And pictured to the front, we have the Duke of Leinster, and pictured behind him is Jean Jasper Jolie, his private secretary. And he continues to play an important role in Jolie's life in Fitzgerald's life until 1820, in the Fitzgerald's life until 1820 with his own death. He's commemorated in St. Kevin's Church of Ireland in Dublin today. His son, Henry Edward Jolie, was born in 1784, and he entered Trinity College as a student, aged 16, in 1800. And around this time, he was frequently seeking work in Dublin Castle, writing to the various administrators that worked there, looking for every sort of office job that was possible, or to transcribe letters and old documents that may have been in the building. He had a particular fondness, as did all of the Jolies, for old documents and artefacts, prints and drawings and so on. He also occasionally worked at Leinster House for the family, including during the years 1801 to 1802, when it's said that he catalogued the books belonging to Lord Edward Fitzgerald, which were then present in Leinster House. And around this time, he was appointed as tutor to the Duke of Leinster's children. Now, you'll probably all know from previous lectures here what happened to the previous tutor of the Dukes of Leinster, but for Henry Edward Jolie, that wasn't the outcome. So, what I want to look at tonight is his diary, effectively the diaries that he's left and what they tell us about education at Carton House, education in the Irish country house at this time, evidence of what it tells us about the Carton domain. Of course, the domain had been laid out from the 1760s by the first Duke and Duchess of Leinster. And the diary is full of evidence of how the family used the domain and how it became an integral part of their life. And the diary also provides us, as I said, an excellent insight into life before the transformation of Carton. And we can see, despite it being amongst Ireland's eminent houses, it was falling into considerable disrepair. The diaries concern Jolie's tutelage of Lord Augustus Frederick Fitzgerald, the eldest surviving son of the Duke of Leinster, pictured here as an infant and pictured in later life, and also the education of his younger brother, Lord William Fitzgerald, born in 1793, Augustus Frederick born in 1791. So the two individuals that we'll look at are only 11 and 8 or 9 years of age at this time. Okay, so this is what we're looking at, being tutored by a 17-year-old who comes to Carton for long stays, returns to Dublin when his studies require, and is also visiting the Fitzgeralds at Leinster House in between, dining frequently indeed in the evening time at Leinster House. So, the first Duchess of Leinster, of course, had said of Carton that she thought when spruced up it would be vastly pretty and as fine as I would ever wish a country house to be. And of course she had her way, and we know it was amongst the most eminent places towards the end of the 18th century. But it does seem to have fallen into disrepair in and around 1799-1800. For example, a visitor to the house in 1779 said, or he complained, that it was the shabbiest dinner I had ever saw at a great man's table, and that he had much preferred a meal at the Inn of Maynooth. Okay. Likewise, in 1802, Philip York, then Earl Hardwicke, Lord Lieutenant of Ireland, visited Carton and noted that while it was a very fine place with extensive plantations in an ugly country, the house is not good. Another visitor at the time said, "We saw Carton, the Duke's house. It is a very respectable mansion built of white-cut stone with a wing on each side, connected by a colonnade. There are several good paintings in the house. The grounds are very beautiful, and although the lawn appears very extensive, the eye is rather deceived. We saw Mr. Connolly's superb house called Castletown. It was looked upon as the finest house in the kingdom, and is certainly a most magnificent mansion, fit for a prince. It is in the same style as Carton, but much superior in extent as well as beauty of architecture." And I suppose Carton at this time did live somewhat in the shadow of Castletown. So Carton, as I mentioned, this is in the years prior to Morrison's remodelling of the house. And of course, I don't actually have an image, I think, in these first few slides of Carton before. I had to give one. But the references in the diary to Jolie frequently being moved from room to room because literally the walls or the roof is caving in on top of them, tells us a little bit about what life was like apart from the shabby dinners. So, for the young, or indeed is Cartown, the seat of the great Duke, or His Grace, the Duke of Leinster. I think this dates from about the 1790s and actually forms part of the Jolie collection, which was deposited in the National Library. So, for the young lords, when Jolie arrived with him, lessons usually began at 8 o'clock in the morning and would last until 3 p.m. in the afternoon. So, not unlike the modern school day for a young child of that age. Well, the only difference for their day occurred at around 10 o'clock when they broke for breakfast. And we're told in the diary that the breakfast would last for 2 hours. Okay, so give you some indication that it wasn't just Cocoa Pops, that there was a little bit more substance to it. We're told by Jolie that the lessons usually began with French fables with 6 or 7 lines of Ovid, the Roman poet, which was gradually increased as the children became more proficient. Other lessons required them to learn a portion of syntax, grammar, 2 or 3 lines of parody, and to write some exercises. And as they advanced, they were made to write clerk's exercises and translate various texts in French and Latin. And mathematics was also taught, particularly algebra. As interesting, Ciarán probed in last week's talk about what type of maths was being taught here in St. Patrick's College. Well, we know that the children did not enjoy the exercises of algebra that was being taught to them by Jolie at Carton. Occasionally, too, he read some Irish history. And this text was Warner's Irish History, specially chosen by Jolie. And the music was also of huge importance to the daily schedule. And the children received weekly lessons from Mr. Barton and Mr. Mulvaney, visiting musicians who would come to the house. Scripture was also taught by Jolie, and there was a weekly visit from Reverend Ashe, the Church of Ireland rector here in Maynooth. This was the man, of course, who had ran afoul of the Duke's tenants at Athy in County Kildare and was sent to Maynooth thereafter. But there seems to have been a good relationship between the young Fitzgeralds and Reverend Ashe at Maynooth. Sports and leisure also formed a major part of the day, and Jolie was expected to oversee what the young lords were actually practicing. Days away from study would require a prior approval of the Duke of Leinster, and he was happy to give these, such as holy days and other days that he deemed that they merited, such as Michaelmas Day, the 29th September, and when the Carton Hunt would take place over the domain, because it was said that by Jolie that the children would be unable to concentrate on their studies on Hunt Day. Another big occasion celebrated during the time of Jolie's tutelage was the election of Lord Robert Fitzgerald, brother of the second Duke, and Mr. Latouche, who were elected, and fireworks greeted their successful election. I picture here the tower, the Tyrconnell Tower at Carton. Of course, this was a favourite spot of the young children to visit. Saturdays were generally lesson-free, and during which time the children could engage in a host of different activities. These included fishing, bathing, shooting, horse riding, and so on the domain. And by modern standards, it seems incredible to think that young children were actually given guns to fire on their own free will. Now, I have 11 and 9-year-old boys myself. We got a bow and arrow set there at Christmas, and there was enough damage done with that. But on one occasion, it said that Lord Kildare had a cross cannon and a revolver in his possession as they made their way towards Maynooth. Jolie noted that he was quite a good shot, and it was claimed that he killed 2 pigeons with 1 shot on one occasion. He would bring with him on these expeditions across the domain and to Maynooth a small Spanish gun, a hawking bag, and a trumpet. And during these many expeditions to Maynooth, they were usually undertaken with their favourite mule, which they called Bonnie Kilroo. The children liked to name things. Certain places on the Carton domain and so on had their own, I suppose, childish names for them. Other pastimes include spearing eels at the cottage to catching bats in the barn, sources of enjoyment, making straw pipes in the farmyard, and there was much amusement, it said, amongst the staff present in the yards when they did this. Other occasions, the children flew kites, and there seemed to be a preoccupation with trying to fly kites with lighted pieces of charcoal in order to elicit a response from Castletown, to see could they be seen at Castletown, and they would write to one another to say that they had been seen. The garden men and the staff on the Carton estate as well were expected to drop everything when the young lords appeared, and to bring them to the water to gather nuts and fruit whenever they were required. About one successful fishing trip in late August 1802, it said that the boys caught 4 tench, perch, and 120 roach, having placed a drum net in the sheet of water before packing the fish in Lord Kildare's handkerchief and returning under the wooden bridge. And we can see here some of the examples of the place names that they give to areas on the domain. Perchy Hole was said to be opposite the sundial. Lord William's Hole at the near point on the island. Croker's Hole near the Garden House. Cooper's Hole near the Iron Gates, and Toten's Hole. Now, Croker, Cooper, and Toten were all estate employees, so the children were effectively naming these locations where they fished or entertained themselves after estate workers. And I just think, wouldn't that be a lovely thing to recreate on the Carton domain as a walk, bringing people from Lord William's Hole to Cooper's Hole to Toten's Hole in an effort to, I suppose, capture something from the past. The children also frequently engaged in swimming and bathing, waking at 4 a.m, as early as 4 a.m. to shoot rabbits and then bathe in the mill race. In the summer months, the young Fitzgeralds were told, bathed every morning in the mill race at Carton. In August 1802, for example, they were there at 8 o'clock, where a tent was pitched for the convenience of their dressing. Here they swam with sheafs and corks, and over time Jolie records their proficiency. He notes in August 1802, for example, for the first time they swam a little without the assistance of sheafs or corks, so much like kids are doing today. Lord Kay, they had nicknames, of course, for swimming. Lord Kildare was known as Davies, Lord William was known as Gull, and Jolie himself was given the nickname Hull, all part of their childish games on the domain. Nighttime then was a different form of entertainment for the kids. Evenings were spent playing billiards and draughts by candlelight. At billiards, it said Jolie took little pity and claimed to be the emperor of the billiards room. When weather didn't permit, they also played ball along the colonnade. We're not quite sure what ball they were playing, but they were kicking or throwing a ball of some description. On other occasions, battles were reenacted and jousts performed amongst the children with weapons. Although, as I say here, it's a little bit of a stretch to suggest that Lord Edward was recreated in this fashion. Fireworks also formed another constant of the life and world of the young Fitzgeralds on the Carton Domain. No expense was spared, it seems, to procure these, and they were purchased, we're told, from Jolie in Dawson Street in Dublin. On the occasion of Lord Kildare's birthday, for example, fireworks were arranged to represent the letter K, and Jolie recorded the evening's entertainment in the diary. We led off 9 sky, 7 table, 2 line rockets, 18 fire pumps, 10 Catherine wheels, 4 serpent boxes, 24 squirks. Mr. Long's coat was entirely burned by a fire pump. There was a grand supper laid out in the gallery. Mr. Long, again, another estate employee, I think he worked closely with the steward, and he was in charge of actually lighting the fireworks. The young lords were also frequent guests here at St. Patrick's, and we're told in the diaries that Augustus Frederick, although he was only 11 years of age for much of Jolie's time at Carton, was expected to take on the responsibilities of his father when he was absent from home. And one of these responsibilities was to represent the Duke of Leinster at the prize-giving ceremony here at St. Patrick's. And he records in his diary, the young lords dined at Maynooth College. We went with them in the evening. Charles wrote to my father, and so on. Jolie, it seems, never had the opportunity of dining here at in St. Patrick's along with the clerical staff. That was left to Lord William and Lord Augustus Frederick. Remarkable to think that an 11 and 9-year-old brought to dinner on their own with the clerical staff here. There were frequent visitors, as I said, to the town of Maynooth as well. And the diaries reflect this, reflect the occasion of visiting for church on a Sunday, for visiting markets and so on. And we get a sense of, again, of that freedom. Once they arrived in Maynooth, they were free to do as they pleased, except for on Sundays when it was a little bit stricter in terms of attending church. As I mentioned, the elder of the Fitzgerald children was expected to perform those duties of his father, and this involved entertaining visitors to Carton who would call, in some cases unannounced, despite the Duke's absence. For example, the visitors included the Henrys of Straffan and the Moores of Moore Abbey in Monasterevin on a frequent basis. Guests were entertained by trips along the water, and Augustus Frederick was expected to go with them and explain the Carton Domain and point out the different sites of interest. He was also expected to take them along the canal to Maynooth, or to the monastic settlement of Grange William, or the Connolly Obelisk, which Jolie noted was built in a very grand style. You can see here the diary entry. It says that this obelisk was built by Mr. Connolly, grandmother, Mr. Connolly, grandmother, AD 1740, in a very grand style. Visitors were also frequent for a variety of celebrations which would take place on the domain and in Carton House itself, including in September 1802 for the celebration of Augustus Frederick's birthday. And this is really interesting. September 1802, that is his 11th birthday, and Jolie notes in it that Lord William was rather tipsy on that occasion. Remember, William is the younger brother, aged 8. Jolie didn't take part in much of the supper or those type of amusements, and he says he went to bed early. And the celebration of the Harvest Home was another important event on the Carton Domain. And this carried on for a number of years after Jolie, but perhaps the best example that we have anywhere of this celebration occurred in October of 1802, when Jolie notes, a little before dinner, the Duke's labourers enjoyed what's called Harvest Home, which consists of a procession of men artfully equipped in straw dresses, mounted on some mules and bullocks, curiously decorated, who, having well refreshed themselves with whisky and porter, danced in a clownish manner to the music of a wretched piper. Okay, so he's not very complimentary of the tenants, the farm workers, and so on that are celebrating the Harvest Home, but I think it's an important reference to this. This was an integral part of estate life in the 19th century. However, social gatherings did not always include the tutor, and there were many occasions where there was a variety of visitors to Carton, and Jolie, once he was finished the lessons with the children, simply repaired to his own bedroom. He wasn't included, for example, with the dinner of the visit of Mr. Henry of Straffan in 1802, which forced him to move bedroom. The Henry's presence there that night forced Jolie to move his bedroom, where he said he roasted 2 tame pigeons he had shot earlier that day for his dinner. So even though he's one of the key staff in the house educating the children, he still has to cook his own dinner in the house. Of another large party, Jolie notes he wasn't present, but there were 76 servants in the house. And this gives us an indication of the status, the lavishness of what has been celebrated here, even though it is somewhat in decline. The only interaction that Jolie appears to have had with the servants in the evening time is when Mr. Long and others would invite him to sup beer in their rooms. And it seems remarkable to think that Jolie would return by foot to Dublin, even though carriages were conveying items and goods to Carton House at this time. And about that walk back to the city centre, to the family's home on Harcourt Street, he wrote, "I went from Carton to Kellystown Gate in 20 minutes, from hence to Shocklands Glen in 15 minutes, hence to the Second Canal Bridge, Rouen Lodge at Lutterstown 25 minutes, hence to Knockmaroon Hill in 25 minutes, hence to the Phoenix Park in 35, and to our house in an hour." And this is a trip that he does on a number of occasions. And it seems that even though he's a student in Trinity College at the time, whenever the Duke of Leinster required him to be at Carton, he just dropped everything and made his way to Maynooth. Christmas at Carton is also identified through the diaries of Henry Jolie. And despite other times of celebration, Christmas seems to have been a very tame affair in terms of other gatherings. For example, he notes that dinner was usually served at Christmas Day at 6 o'clock, with most of the house in bed by 10 o'clock after playing billiards. And the holiday period thereafter was spent in the library or playing in the saloon. So the weather, of course, was a little bit too bad for the children to be outside, so their time was spent in the library and the saloon. And here the children played blind man's buff in the dark. Lessons were still adhered to over the Christmas period, but he was a little bit lax, I suppose, in that regard, and only pressed them to learn some syntax before their breakfast. The biggest festivities of the Christmas period occurred towards the end of the Christmas holidays on the 4th of January, when Lord William's birthday was celebrated with a bonfire, and again the firing of pistols into the air by servants and children alike. Jolie also references the frequent visits to Leinster House, where the Fitzgerald women, it seems, spent most of their time. So again, through his diaries and what he's saying about his time at Carton, we get a sense of who's occupying Carton. And it seems that the women of the house tend to spend more of their days in Leinster House in Dublin, where they entertain guests such as Lady Mary Ross and Emily Henry of Straffan. Leinster House, of course, would play a prominent role in the Jolie or in the Fitzgerald household until 1815, when it was sold to finance the redesign of Carton. And as mentioned earlier, part of his time at Leinster House also involved cataloguing books. Now, I don't know if the library of Lord Edward Fitzgerald survives anywhere to this day, or indeed whether that catalogue that he put together does, but it would be interesting to actually uncover. So Jolie's tenure at Carton is somewhat brief. It occurs, as I said, over an 18-month period between 1801 and the end of 1802. But it does give us an indication into the world of the children of the Dukes of Leinster. It gives us an insight into the education of children in the Irish country house at this time. It also gives us an indication of the prior education of Augustus Frederick before he is sent to Eton a little bit later. He was, of course, one of the leading aristocrats of the 19th century, Grand Master of the Freemasons, supporter of Catholic emancipation, amongst other things. But no biography of the Duke of Leinster survives, the third Duke of Leinster, despite being a prominent individual at that time. And perhaps when it does, these diaries will form part of that early understanding of the Duke's life and how it was shaped. Henry Joly himself was later appointed a rector of Clonsast in County Offaly, and will go on to become Archdeacon of Killala and Chancellor of Kildare of the Church of Ireland. Positions, it seems, he acquired through a continued acquaintance with the third Duke of Leinster. For example, in 1835, Henry Joly was offered a small estate at a place called Carrick-a-Holt in County Clare by the Duke of Leinster, and which he purchased from him. Of course, it came at a cost, because within a decade, Carrick-a-Holt was devastated by the Great Famine. And again, Henry Joly's account of his time managing that estate and owning that property in County Clare is quite interesting. He assisted in emigration several hundred tenants from that portion of County Clare and published in pamphlet form his memories of doing so. He died in 1852. As I said, he was the grandfather of John Joly, the eminent scientist and geologist. So that, I suppose, is an insight into the Joly diaries, the diary of Henry Joly, and what it tells us about Maynooth. There's much more. It's packed, and I've only given you an introduction tonight on what the diaries contain. It's packed with information about Carton Domain, about life in Carton House, and indeed about life in Maynooth as well at the time. And I think if there's one picture that we'll leave you with, is that image of the 11-year-old Duke of Leinster with a cross cannon and a sporting gun somewhere outside Maynooth, firing into the air. Quite remarkable. So I hope you've enjoyed listening to that presentation, and that maybe you'll get to see the Joly diaries in more detail. So thank you very much.